February is Black History Month, and earlier today, we spoke with the executive director at the Museum Castle about the Underground Railroad stops in Marietta. Our Haley Lanham has more about the Underground Railroad self-guided tour.
A self-guided Underground Railroad tour by the Castle Museum has a lot of history, especially in Marietta. In fact, a family who once lived in Harmer were involved in a mob riot as they were housing an Underground Railroad newspaper. The warehouse was burned to the ground, and one of the ministers who was running the newspaper was shot and killed.
It inspired people like John Brown to become an active part of the anti-slavery movement, which was more active, to say the least, and in some cases very violent, but they became, instead of a pacifist movement, it became a more active and hands-on movement where they actually went to try to liberate and help these freedom seekers get across into free territory and escape to Canada.
There are many sites that you can visit within Marietta or Washington County that are marked with historical markers for you to identify.
The Eels House on Marietta College's campus. Just outside of Marietta, there's the Constitution station, which was Judge Ephraim Cutler, who was one of the leaders of that. On the west side over in Harmer, the Douglas Putnam House, the Anchorage that most people know, his brother, whose house was torn down next door, that was a big station on the Underground Railroad, and he was one of the leaders of the entire movement here in the Mid-Ohio Valley. On the other side of the river, of course, Henderson Hall and several other places over there. So there's lots of different places to see and explore.
In Marietta, I'm Haley Lanham with WTAP News. This is Home.